Under a sky painted in fading gold, the wind swept across the plains, carrying the scent of smoke and pine. The wilderness stretched endlessly, its silence broken only by the cry of a hawk circling above. The mountains loomed like dark sentinels, watching over the last remnants of a world untamed. Somewhere beyond those ridges, a story was unfolding, a story of survival, of choices made when the heart and hunger collided. She had not meant to come this far. The trail had swallowed her days ago, leaving her with nothing but torn clothes, aching feet, and a desperate hope that anyone would take her in. Winter was close, and the nights bit with cold sharp enough to break the spirit. Each step she took felt heavier than the last. She had given up everything when she left the settlement, chasing a promise that had turned into dust. When she reached the edge of the Apache lands, she could barely stand. The wilderness had stripped her of pride, and she no longer cared what judgment awaited her. She needed warmth. She needed shelter. So when the trading camp appeared through the haze of dusk fires flickering and shadows moving in slow rhythm to the drumbeat, she walked straight into it. The camp fell silent when they saw her. A pale woman, worn from travel, hair tangled with dust, eyes hollow but burning with something wild. The men exchanged looks, murmuring in a language she couldn't understand. The women paused their work, some frowning, others watching with pity. She didn't speak. She only raised her hand slightly, showing she meant no harm. Her voice trembled when she finally found the words, "I need a place to stay." "Just for the night?" An elder stepped forward, his weathered face unreadable. He said something low to a younger mantle, strong, his chest marked with the red paint of a warrior. The man's gaze held hers for a long moment. There was something in his eyes, wary, but not cruel. He turned to the elder, spoke again, then nodded. The old man gestured toward a tent near the fire. "You stay," the elder said in broken English, "but you must give." She didn't ask what that meant. She already knew. By the time the fire died low, her fate was sealed. She gave herself in exchange for shelter, not out of love, not even desire, but necessity. The cold didn't care for dignity, and the world beyond those campfires had already taken too much from her. She thought it would end their single night of shame and warmth before she vanished. Again, at dawn. But it didn't. The one who came to her tent wasn't the man who had bargained. It was the warrior she had seen earlier, the one whose silence felt heavier than all the voices around him. He didn't speak when he entered. His shadow fell across her as the wind pressed against the hide walls, making the fire tremble. She expected the same hunger she had seen in other men, but what came instead was quiet. He untied the furs, knelt beside her, and covered her shoulders with a blanket. "You cold," he said simply. She looked up at him, startled. The flickering light caught the scars along his arm, the beads tied into his dark hair, the calm in his eyes. There was strength there, yes, but also restraint. He didn't touch her beyond what was needed. He didn't ask anything. He just sat there, watching the fire, like he was guarding her from something unseen that night. She slept without fear for the first time in months. When morning came, she expected him to be gone, but he was outside, tending to the fire. He had set out food for her, a small piece of bread, roasted corn, and water from a clay pot. No one had ever done that for her without wanting something in return. She thanked him softly, though her voice broke halfway through. He only nodded, his expression unreadable. "You stay," he said again, "safe here." But safety was a foreign word to her. She had known betrayal too long, and the walls she built around her heart were not easily broken. The other women still stared when she passed, whispering behind her back. She didn't belong, and she knew it. Still, each day she stayed. The world around her began to shift. She watched the warrior work, carving wood, training younger men, tending the horses near the river. There was something disciplined, almost gentle, in the way he moved. The others respected him, but also kept their distance. At night, he would sit by the fire, silent, his gaze always fixed on the horizon. She wondered what ghosts haunted him when she tried to leave. The guilt of what she had given weighed too heavily. But the forest was cruel, and she barely made it past the ridge before the storm came down in sheets of rain. He found her there, trembling beneath a tree, soaked and weak. Without a word, he lifted her into his arms and carried her back through the mud and thunder. That was the night something changed between them when she woke. He was there again, sitting near the fire, his arm bruised from the fall, but his eyes steady. She whispered, "Why did you come for me?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. No one should die alone. Those words stayed with her. Days turned into weeks, and she began to learn their ways, the rhythm of life in the camp. The songs sung at dusk, the way they honored the land as if it were alive. She helped the women grind corn, learned to stitch hides, and carried water from the river. Slowly, she became more than an outsider. Yet even as she tried to belong, she couldn't forget how she had arrived what she had traded. It was a secret she feared would never wash away, but the warrior seemed to see beyond that. He never treated her with pity, nor did he speak of the night she had offered herself for warmth. Instead, he taught her small things, how to listen to the wind, how to find the trails by broken twigs, how to sense a storm before it came. In his quiet way, he was giving her back something she thought she had lost long ago. Her worth, the others began to notice. The glances grew sharper, whispers colder. Some didn't approve a white woman living among them, cared for by one of their own. There were old wounds between their worlds, scars too deep to easily forget. But the warrior stood firm, his presence enough to silence most. One evening, as the sun bled into the mountains, she stood by the fire and watched him return from the hunt. His horse was dusted with red clay, his bow slung low across his back. When he looked at her, the noise of the camp seemed to fade. She realized then that she was no longer afraid. But peace was a fragile thing in those lands. Rumors spread from nearby towns, whispers of soldiers moving west, rounding up tribes, burning camps. The air grew tense. Men sharpened their weapons, women packed supplies. She could see the unease in the warrior's face. We spoke little of it. One night, as the drums stopped and silence settled over the plains, he came to her tent. The firelight caught the edge of his jaw, the shadow of sorrow in his eyes. "If the soldiers come," he said quietly, "you must go east. I will find you after." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, I won't leave you." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You gave yourself for shelter," he said softly, "but I will give you a home." And in that moment, under the restless stars of the old American frontier, she felt something she hadn't in years belonging. Yet as distant thunder rolled over the horizon, she knew that peace never lasted long in a world built on survival. The night wind carried the scent of smoke again, this time not from the campfire, but from something burning far away, and when the first gunshot echoed through the valley, she understood that the shelter she had traded for was about to be tested by the fire of fate. The echo of that gunshot tore through the stillness like a warning from the heavens. She froze where she stood, the small clay bowl in her hand slipping and breaking at her feet. The fire crackled, but no one moved. A few of the men lifted their heads, eyes narrowing toward the dark ridges to the north. Then came another shot, faint but closer, carried by the wind. Panic rippled through the camp like a sudden storm. The warrior stepped out from his tent, his face hard and steady even as the others whispered in fear. He raised his hand, signaling the younger men to gather their weapons. Horses neighed in the distance, restless and uneasy. The scent of smoke drifted stronger now, and she knew it wasn't from their fire. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked toward him, silently begging for assurance. He glanced back at her, just once. That look told her everything danger was coming, and he meant to face it. She wanted to speak, to tell him not to go, but the words caught in her throat. He had already turned toward the hills, bow in hand, the others following close behind. The elder stayed behind with the women and children, barking orders in a firm, low voice. As the men vanished into the dark, she stood frozen by the fire. Her hands trembled. The night suddenly felt colder, emptier. Every sound, the crack of the firewood, the cry of the wind felt louder, sharper. She tried to stay calm, but fear clawed at her chest. For the first time since she'd come to the camp, She realized how fragile this peace truly was. Hours passed like shadows creeping across the earth. The women gathered the children into the tents, their eyes wide and frightened. She helped where she could, fetching water, mending a torn blanket, holding a crying child until he fell asleep. But her thoughts never left the warrior. Every flicker of light beyond the ridge made her flinch. Every gust of wind made her heart jump. When dawn finally touched the horizon, she saw movement among the trees. The warriors were returning. Relief swept over her, but it faded just as quickly when she saw their faces. They were silent, weary, their eyes dark with something unspoken. Behind them, the warrior walked slower than usual, his steps heavy, his shoulders tense. He didn't look at her as he passed. Later, when the camp had settled, she found him by the river. He stood with his bow slung over his shoulder, staring at the reflection of the mountains in the water. She approached quietly, afraid to break the fragile calm. "What happened?" she asked softly. He didn't turn at first. "Soldiers," he said at last. "They burned a small camp north of here. Took the horses, killed 3 men. They move this way." Her stomach twisted. "What will you do?" He looked at her then, his eyes steady. "We will not run. This is our land." There was pride in his voice, but also something deeper, quiet sorrow that came from years of loss. She wanted to argue, to tell him that fighting would bring more pain, but she saw in his face that it wasn't a choice. The land wasn't just home to them. It was their soul. In the days that followed, the camp grew restless. Scouts came and went, reporting movements in the valley. Fires were kept small, and the children were told to stay close. The air carried the weight of waiting, tension that made even the birds fall silent. She tried to help however she could, gathering herbs, grinding corn, repairing clothing. The women had begun to accept her now, if not as one of them, then at least as someone who shared their fear. One of them, an older woman with silver-streaked hair, often sat beside her in the evenings, telling her stories of the old ways of how the mountains were born from the tears of the earth, and how the spirits still walked among the trees. Through those stories, she began to understand the people who had taken her in. Their lives were hard, but their hearts were full of meaning. Every sunrise, every fire, every song was tied to something greater than survival. And yet their world was shrinking, pushed by forces they couldn't stop. Sometimes at night, she would wake and see the warrior sitting near her tent, keeping watch. The glow of the dying fire would cast shadows across his face, softening the sharp lines and revealing something gentler. Once, she asked him why he never slept. He smiled faintly. "When I sleep, I dream of what I have lost," he said. "When I wake, I protect what I have left." His words stayed with her. She had lost to her home, her family, her sense of belonging. But here, amid the sound of drums and the crackle of the fire, something inside her was slowly mending. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the plains in red and gold, she found herself standing beside him at the river again. The light shimmered on the water like molten copper. "You could have left me that night," she said quietly. "You didn't have to take me in." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You were lost," he said simply. "No one should be lost alone." She felt her throat tighten. "And now?" she asked. "Am I still lost?" He was silent for a long time before answering. "Not to me." The words settled between them like the last rays of sunlight, warm and dangerous. She turned away before he could see the tears in her eyes. But peace, she soon learned, was only borrowed. A few days later, the scouts returned with grim news. The soldiers had set up camp near the valley. They had rifles, horses, and orders to move through Apache territory by week's end. The elder called a meeting that night. The fire in the center of the camp blazed high, casting fierce shadows across their faces. Voices rose and fell in debate. Some urged to flee deeper into the mountains, others to fight. She stood at the edge, watching. The warrior spoke last. His words were calm, but carried weight. He reminded them that running would not bring peace, that surrender would not bring mercy. His people had already lost too much. The elder nodded slowly. "Then we prepare." That night she couldn't sleep. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and fear. She thought of the small children sleeping in the tents, of the mothers trying to hide their worry. And she thought of the man who had given her a home when she had nothing left. When she finally stepped outside, the moon was high, silver light washing over the camp. The warrior stood near the fire, sharpening his knife, his face unreadable in the glow. She walked toward him, her heart pounding. "If they come," she whispered, "what will happen to us?" He looked up at her. "If they come, we fight." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "And if you fall—" He paused, then reached out, his hand brushing hers. "Then you live. For both of us." His words were gentle, but final. She wanted to protest, to beg him to run, but she saw the truth in his eyes. He belonged to this land in a way she never could. He would never abandon it. The days that followed were filled with preparation. The men built barricades of stone and wood. The women gathered food, packed belongings, and prayed. The air buzzed with quiet determination. Every moment felt like the calm before a storm. She stayed close to the children, teaching them how to stay low, how to hide if danger came. The older women showed her the paths through the hills, the places where the ground softened near the riverbank roots for escape if the worst came. And then, one morning, the sound of horses echoed again through the valley. The camp went still. A hawk screamed overhead, circling above the trees. The warrior stepped out from his tent, his bow already in hand. The others followed silently, spreading out into the tall grass. She stood by the fire, her heart pounding so loud she could barely breathe. She could see the dust rising on the horizon, the faint glint of metal in the sunlight. Soldiers. The elder turned to her, his expression grave. "If it begins," he said, "you take the children. East path. Do not stop." She nodded, her hands shaking. She didn't know if she could do it, but she would try. The warrior met her eyes once more before he went. There were no words this time. Only a look. Steady, deep, and full of everything unspoken between them. She watched him disappear into the tall grass, his figure swallowed by the morning light, and as the first shout rang out across the valley, she clutched the small pendant he had given her days before. Simple carved stone and whispered a silent prayer to the wind. The peace they had built was crumbling, and all that remained was love standing against the fire. The soldiers reached the far rim of the valley by noon, a thin line of blue and dust against the hard sky. The camp answered with silence, no drums, no songs, only the low hiss of the river slipping past the reeds. The warrior lay in the tall grass with 3 younger men and a scout who had seen too many winters to waste breath. He studied the slope where the soldiers had stopped to water their horses and saw the set of their shoulders, the way they moved with caution rather than hunger. This was not a raid. This was a step in a longer walk. A slow sweep across Apache country, meant to push people out without admitting it aloud. He had seen that kind of march before. It always began with polite words and ended with ashes. Back in the camp, the woman moved between tents, gathering the children, counting them twice. The elder had sent the oldest boys to the ridge trail and told the girls to carry water and blankets. She tied strips of cloth around a little one's wrists so he wouldn't wander, and tucked a bundle of corn cakes beneath a shawl. Her heart pounded, but her hands stayed steady. It had been a long time since she felt fear and purpose in the same breath. Now they braided together, tightening her focus. She would get them east if things turned, and yet every step she planned felt like a promise she might not be able to keep. By the river, subplot of trouble none of them had asked for was unfolding. A child had been coughing all morning, a deep rattle that worried the older women. The creek ran lower than it should have this time of year, and the fever that followed bad water had a way of spreading through a camp faster than any horse. The silver-haired woman steamed pine needles in a small pot and crushed willow bark with a stone. And the woman, the outsider, who had become something more, knelt beside her to hold the little one upright. Each breath the child took felt like a fight. The older woman looked at the river with a frown, as if trying to read the season in the way the light slid across it. Drought, soldiers, sickness, the valley had a way of stacking its tests. Across the grass, The warrior watched a white flag rise from the soldiers' line. A single rider detached from the cluster and descended the slope at a careful pace. The old scout clicked his tongue in disgust. White flags had come before to talk of treaty lines and safe passage, talk of trading posts and supplies. The warrior signaled for 2 men to stay hidden and then stood, bow low at his side, palm raised. He met the rider in the empty space between the river and the sage, where the wind carried the smell of horses and hot iron. The rider wore a captain's coat, though his cuffs were frayed. He took off his hat when he reached the bottom of the slope and looked almost grateful to be talking instead of climbing. The warrior did not speak first. He let the captain carry the weight of the silence. The man cleared his throat and said he had orders to move. Through the valley on the way to a fort where reports had named trouble, the captain said there would be no fires left behind, no harm, if there was no resistance. He said the word peaceful and tried to hold on to it. The warrior looked past him at the line of rifles on the ridge, saw the truth their route cut straight. Through the hunting grounds and the cedar grove where the people gathered in autumn, the path the captain called a road was a scar the land would not forget. He answered and measured. English, so there would be no mistake. The river was not a road, the hills were not empty, and the camp would not be moved like a tent in wind. The captain listened and nodded, like a man who wanted to be reasonable, then unfolded a paper with a seal. The paper listed instructions and distances, and the seal promised protection for those who obeyed. The warrior did not touch it. He had learned that ink could be sharper than knives. He told the captain that the camp would not fire first, but would not stand aside. The captain pressed his lips tight, the hat turning slowly in his hands, and said he would return at sundown with an answer. While they spoke, a separate thread pulled tight in the cottonwood grove east of camp. A trader had been shadowing the soldiers for days, drawn by the promise of new business where fear was thick and coin changed hands. He had a wagon, a smile that never reached his eyes, and a ledger full of names he had not kept faith with. The trader said he could carry messages. He said he could bring flour and coffee to the camp at a fair price, but the elder had not forgotten. A winter years earlier, when that man's fair price had left 3 families hungry, the elder told him to turn his wagon north and let the army feed him. The trader pretended to consider it, then asked questions that probed where the camp would move, whether the people would hide weapons near the river crossings. The elder turned away without answering. When the trader left, a girl trailing the goats said she saw him walk not to the road, but to a stand of rocks, and signal someone with his hat. She did not know if it meant anything, only that it put a cold edge on the warm day. By mid-afternoon, the woman at the river had the feverish child sleeping. The silver-haired healer beckoned her closer and pressed a small deerskin pouch into her palm. Charcoal, plantain, powdered bark. She spoke a phrase that meant, "Take this if the water turns bad." The woman nodded and slipped the pouch into the fold of her dress next to the carved stone the warrior had given her. When she straightened, she saw the elder watching from across the clearing. His eyes were kind but troubled, as if he were weighing 2 truths that could not live together, that she had brought luck at a hard time, and that luck in this country is often called for payment. The captain returned before sundown with 2 riders and a different face.
One he saved for orders he did not want to give.
His answer was the same one that paper had offered: move aside. Let the column through, and all would be well. The warrior told him no. The captain's jaw tensed. He said the route could not change and warned that his men were tired and one was hurt. He asked Almos, begged not to make this day harder. The warrior thought of the boy coughing by the river, and the mothers filling water skins, and the elder, who had seen the world rearranged more than once. He said the camp would stay. The captain sighed, put his hat back on, and turned his horse uphill. He did not look back. In the hour that followed, subplots braided tighter. The trader's wagon appeared again near the cottonwood grove, and this time he was not alone. A pair of town men with new rifles sat by his boxers, drinking from a jug and laughing with a kind of tension that had no humor in it. One of them stared at the camp with a long glass and said he could make a fortune if the government paid for the land and he bought early. The trader said fortune came to men who kept their mouths shut and their books open. He did not see the small shape tucked behind a grass hummock, the goat girl, who had followed out of curiosity and stayed out of worry. She watched the men count rounds into their belts and heard a phrase that made her stomach turn. Night circled before she slipped away toward the east path at a crouched run at the same time. A young warrior in the main party was wrestling a different kind of choice. He had a brother among the soldiers, taken years earlier, when their mother died at a mission far to the south and a priest sent the boy to live with a family near the fort. The young man had not seen his brother since, but he had heard rumors of a scout with eyes like his own. That afternoon, as he lay in the grass staring through the stems, he thought he saw that face among the troopers, a familiar tilt to the head, a scar the same as the scratch they had both gotten, climbing a cliff as children. If it was him, a meeting might save blood, or it might betray his people. He did not tell the warrior. He kept the possibility folded up inside, like a scrap of paper that burned the fingers. The woman's past threaded itself into the day as well. Near dusk, as she stood by the storage racks tying up bundles, a rider came from the settlement road carrying a strip of blue cloth on a stick. He called out in the trader's tongue that he had a message for a woman who matched her description. She didn't move at first. The world narrowed to the color of that cloth, the one the traveling preachers liked to wave when they brought news. The elder signaled for the man to stop well short of the camp. The rider, nervous, decent, out of his depths, said he had been paid to coins to deliver a note. He held up a folded paper with her name scratched the way a man who never learned it would write it, crooked but mean. The woman recognized the hand of the man who had promised her shelter and then charged her the price that had broken her. The message said there was a place for her back east if she came alone. It promised forgiveness and spoke of a small house near a church. She felt the camp around her, the smells of smoke and corn and horses. The rhythm of the river and the letter felt like a stone thrown into a clear pool to cloud it. She folded the paper without reading further, then placed it in the fire, watched the flame curl the edges, and told the rider to take his coins back to the one who sent him. The rider hesitated, then nodded, and turned his horse quietly away as the sun slid behind the mountains. The captain formed his line at the lower ridge. He had orders that said move at first light. He told his sergeant they would hold for the night, put out pickets, and wait for dawn to decide. He walked the length of the line, looking each man in the face, reading fear and fatigue, and the complicating questions they did not ask aloud. He had come from a river town where the war he fought before this one had left empty chairs at every table. He had promised himself he would not add more names to the list if he could help it. Yet the map in his pocket drew a clean line across terrain that had stories older than the ink, and he felt the wrongness of it pressed between his shoulder blades like a hand. At twilight, the goat girl reached the elder, told him what she had seen, the trader with the town men, the counting of rounds, the talk of night circle. The elder listened, eyes narrowed, then sent 2 runners to shadow the wagon and 1 to warn the warrior. He called the women and told them to move the children to the ravine east of the cedar stand, quiet, slow, no crying now. The woman gathered her bundle and the deerskin pouch and took the feverish boy into her arms. His head rested against her collarbone, hot and heavy. She could feel the river's breath along the path and the ground's cool, rising as the light faded. Each step sounded too loud, each twig unlucky. She kept walking. On the ridge, the warrior crouched as a shape moved low among the sage, the messenger from the elder. Breathless. The trader had men with rifles planning to circle by night from the east. The soldier line held steady on the west slope. 2 knives at the throat at once. The warrior's gut went cold at the thought of fire in the tents while his eyes were fixed on the ridge. He signaled for the scout to slip toward the cottonwoods and for 2 young men to arc wide and watch the ravine. He turned to the dusk and seemed to speak to a task in the land, to give one clear sign. The sign came as sound rather than sight, a coyote's call, answered by another in a pattern the old scout had taught the boys years ago. The echo said 3 men near the grove, moving slow. Then, from the west, a single note from a meadowlark, the signal the soldiers used for change of watch, sounded twice when it should have sounded once. The young warrior's skin prickled. His mind leaped to the face he thought he had seen. 2 worlds were about to move at once. The woman reached the ravine and passed the child to a girl who had strong arms and a softer voice. She slid back along the path toward the main camp, needing to find the warrior even if she had nothing new to give him. Halfway there, she heard a branch crack a small sound, but wrong in the quiet. She stopped and lowered herself into the grass. A shadow slipped between the trunks ahead, then another, then the dull click of metal. The men from town were already in the grove. She lay very still, counting their steps, tasting iron in her mouth. One of them whispered that the camp would be easy once they spooked the horses. Another said the soldier line would do the rest when panic spread. She touched the carved stone at her throat and felt, without understanding, that the night was about to split. On the ridge, the captain stared into the dark and thought of water. He could hear the river's thin song and imagined another river far away that had carried rafts, stacked with barrels and crates. He wondered who had first chosen this path across the valley. Was it a runner trying to reach a family with news? Or a trader mapping profit? Or a scout who loved the easy grade and forgot the promises that would be made on his map later? While he stood there, a figure detached from the grass and approached with hands away from weapons. The sentry tensed, but the captain held him. The figure stopped at a respectful distance. In the fading light, the captain saw a face that looked bone-tired and resolute. The warrior. The captain did not reach for his hat this time. He waited. The warrior spoke first now. There were men from the town and the cottonwoodsmen who did not wear uniforms and were not bound by the captain's paper. If anything happened in the night, it would not be started by the camp. The captain's eyes narrowed. He believed the man before him more than he believed the trader, whose wagon wheels he had kept seeing in the dust for days. He sent 2 of his own to verify, not toward the camp, but toward the grove. He told the warrior quietly that if the shots came from the east, he would not move his line. He tried to turn that promise into a kind of bridge across the space between them. By the river, the fevered child stirred and coughed with a sound that silenced the women. The silver-haired healer listened, pressed a hand to the small chest, and frowned. She asked for the pouch the woman carried. The powder went into water, the cup to the child's lips. The boy's lashes fluttered. His breath evened a little. It was not a cure but a pause, a small mercy. The women looked at one another with a hope that felt dangerous in a night like this. Somewhere in the grass, the young warrior's heart hammered as he saw the silhouette on the west. Ridge shift and a head turned just so, just like his own. He wanted to call out a childhood name, but the sound would carry to the wrong ears. He placed a flat stone on a larger one and slid it just enough to make a soft grinding. Another sign from the code boys used before words. The figure on the ridge stilled and moved a hand in a small circle, the gesture they had invented for I hear Yubi, for the dark folded around him again. The young warrior closed his eyes. The world tilted. A brother on one ridge, his people on the other, the trader's hate in the middle. And the river trying to tell them all to slow down. The cottonwood grove drew its own breath. The town men spread out, nerves tugging at their trigger fingers. One stumbled on a root and cursed under his breath. The goat girl, who had not obeyed the order to stay hidden in the ravine, lay behind a fallen log with a slingshot in her shaking hands and a pocket full of small, smooth stones. She didn't plan to hit anyone's head. She planned to startle a horse. She planned to make noise in the wrong place at the right time. She planned, with a child's courage, to change a map none of them could see. The trader, restless, climbed onto his wagon wheel to get a better look, his boots slipping on the iron rim. He clutched the side and swore. A horse in the nearby stand jerked its head, snorted, and shifted. The wagon creaked. The goat girl pulled the slingshot back, breath held at the same moment. The captain's scouts eased toward the grove. The warriors' men melted along the eastern flank. The women in the ravine tightened their circle around the children, and the woman pressed her palm flat to the earth as if she could feel decisions travel through it like thunder. The first stone left the slingshot with a whisper. A horse screamed, reared against its tether, and the quiet carefully built by both sides all-day dash shattered. No one fired first from the camp, and no order came down the ridge. But the night erupted anyway, shouts overlapping, hooves tearing at the ground, a crash of wooden wheel against rock that sent the trader tumbling. Somewhere, a rifle went off at the sky panic, not aim. The sound flashed across the valley and rolled back on itself. On the ridge, the captain raised his hand, unsure whether to wave his men down or pull them into formation. In the grass, the warrior stood halfway between the soldiers and his people, his bow unraised, eyes searching for the thread that would keep the fabric from ripping. The woman rose from the grass and took one step toward the grove, then another drawn, by the sense that the small acts people take at the edge of fear matter more than the proclamations stamped on paper. Behind her, the ravine held its breath. In front of her, the cottonwoods flickered with shadows. The river kept moving as if it knew the valley had lived through more than maps and flags. The next sound could decide whether the night became a flight, a fight, or a standoff no one would ever forget. And while the wind gathered itself for another pass, every heart in the valley waited for the choice that was coming fast, close, and sharp as the edge of a blade held just above the skin. The first shot cracked the air like a whip, echoing off the canyon walls. The horses screamed and bolted, their hooves tearing up the dirt as shouts rose from every side. The woman threw herself flat to the ground, her hands clutching the pendant at her throat. Smoke drifted across the camp as the sky seemed to tremble with noise and chaos. From the ridge, the warrior saw the flash of gunfire near the cottonwoods and knew it wasn't from his people. His heart sank. Those weren't soldiers firing the first round. It was the traitor and his men. He cursed under his breath and signaled the warriors to hold their ground. But panic was already spreading. The young ones thought the soldiers had attacked, and arrows flew before anyone could stop them. The captain, standing halfway down the slope, shouted for his men to cease fire. But his voice was swallowed by the roar of frightened horses and the thunder of rifles. Two of his troopers fired back, one shot hitting a tree near the warrior's shoulder. The air was thick with dust and confusion, men yelling in two languages, neither side sure who was enemy and who was ally. The woman crawled toward the fire pit, her dress torn, her face streaked with ash. She could see the elder trying to gather the women and children toward the ravine. A small boy stumbled and she rushed forward, grabbing him by the arm. The sound of bullets striking rock rang behind her. She kept running, her lungs burning at the river's edge. The old healer knelt beside the sick child, shielding him with her own body. The woman joined her, breathless. "We have to move," she said. The healer shook her head, eyes fierce. "He cannot walk. Go. You take the others." But she couldn't leave. Something inside her refused to abandon another soul to die alone. She tore a strip of cloth from her sleeve and dipped it in the cold water, pressing it against the child's forehead. The roar of the fight felt distant now, like thunder rolling over the plains. But the fear was a living thing, pressing down on every heartbeat. On the ridge, the captain saw one of his men fall. He knelt beside him, feeling the blood soak into the dust. "Hold your fire," he shouted again, voice hoarse. "They're not attacking." But discipline was breaking. The younger soldiers fired without orders, frightened and desperate. The captain turned toward the grove, toward the trader's wagon, and saw shapes moving fast among the trees. He grabbed his rifle and started down the hill. The warrior moved at the same time, sprinting through the grass with a silent fury. His bow was drawn, eyes locked on the grove where the flashes came from. The air smelled of gunpowder and earth. He passed two of his men on the way, signaling for them to protect the eastern flank. He had one thought: tend the source of the fire before everything burned. The trader was reloading behind his wagon, cursing as his men panicked. "They're coming this way," one shouted. The trader's hands shook. He hadn't expected this. He had wanted fear, not war. He raised his rifle, scanning the dark. And that was when he saw the warrior emerging from the shadows, eyes burning like the storm itself. The trader fired once, missed, and stumbled backward. The warrior's arrow flew straight. It struck the trader's gun arm, driving him to his knees. The wagon horse reared, kicking free of its rope, knocking over a lantern. Flames spread across the canvas and boxes, the fire crackling as smoke rose into the night. The men scattered, shouting for mercy from the ridge. The captain saw the fire leap, and the shape of the warrior moving through the glow. For a moment, everything seemed still, the flicker of flames, the the sound of wind through the reeds, the river reflecting the red light like blood. Then the captain shouted for his men to fall back. "No more shooting," he ordered, his voice breaking through the noise. Slowly, the gunfire thinned until only the crackle of fire and the pounding of feet remained. The woman looked up from the riverbank, saw the blaze near the grove. Her stomach twisted. She didn't know if it meant victory or ruin. The healer touched her arm. "Go," she said. "He sleeps now. The spirits will guard him." She hesitated only a moment before turning and running toward the camp. The sky had gone dark, smoke curling above the treetops. The ground felt alive under her feet, every step filled with dread. She passed the ravine where the children huddled, whispering soft words to calm them. Then she saw him through the haze, standing against the firelight, his figure carved in motion, bow still in hand. Relief surged through her, but before she could call out, another shot rang from the distance. The warrior flinched, the bullet striking the earth near his feet. The captain's men had misunderstood again, seeing the fire as a signal for attack. The warrior turned sharply, waving his arm to his people to stand down. But fear was already winning. The younger ones, seeing him exposed, cried out and rushed to defend him. The line broke again into chaos. The captain pushed through his men furious. "Stop. Hold your fire." He could barely see through the smoke, but he caught sight of the warrior, unarmed now, walking toward him. The man was bleeding from a cut on his temple, his chest rising and falling hard. But his hands were open. The captain lowered his weapon. "You need to get your people back," he shouted. The warrior's voice came low but steady. "Your men started this, not mine." "I know," the captain said. His face was pale. "But it's out of control." The warrior's eyes moved past him, to where soldiers were chasing one of the younger Apache through the brush. He clenched his fists. "Then we end it now." Before the captain could answer, a scream came from the river, a woman's voice. Both men turned. The woman was running toward them, her hands raised. Behind her, a soldier had fired again, mistaking her for a threat. The bullet struck the ground near her, spraying dirt across her face. The warrior's body moved before his mind could stop it. He lunged forward, grabbing her and pulling her behind a fallen tree. She gasped for breath, clutching his arm. "They're shooting at anyone," she whispered. "The children, they're still in the ravine." He looked at her, his jaw tightening. "Stay here," he said. She shook her head. "Not without you." The world around them was unraveling, the fire spreading. The cries of men and horses tangled in the wind, the river reflecting flashes of light. The warrior stood, raising his hands high so the soldiers could see. His voice rang out, strong and clear. "No more fighting." For a moment the sound carried across the field. Even the captain froze. The echo rolled through the valley, heavy and raw. Then, like a whisper following thunder, the cry of a child rose from the ravine. The woman turned sharply, heart racing. The warrior followed her gaze and saw the small figure stumbling through the smoke. A boy, one of the youngest, had wandered out calling for his mother. She ran toward him, her steps frantic. The captain shouted for his men to hold, but confusion still ruled the air. One soldier, shaking, raised his rifle, not seeing who the small shape was. The warrior broke into a sprint. Time seemed to stretch as he ran, the air burning in his chest, the ground blurring beneath his feet. The child looked up just as the shot cracked again. The woman screamed. But there was no sound after that, only the wind. The fire and the river carrying their echoes away. The smoke thickened, wrapping the valley in a ghostly veil. The captain dropped his rifle and ran forward, shouting orders that no one heard. The soldiers hesitated, fear now replaced by shame. The warrior knelt beside the boy, motionless. The woman fell to her knees beside him, tears streaking through the soot on her face. Far behind them, the old healer lifted her head toward the rising smoke. The sound of drums began soft, slow, like the heartbeat of the land mourning its own. The tension hung heavy in the air, every breath uncertain, every second stretched thin. The night had become a battlefield of silence and regret, and no one knew what would come when the smoke finally cleared. The warrior lifted his head slowly, meeting the captain's across the open ground. For a long moment, neither spoke. The captain's face was drawn, haunted by what he could not undo. The warrior's gaze was steady, burning with something that was not hate, but sorrow. And as the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain from the distant mountains, the woman realized that whatever happened next would decide more than their lives. It would decide what kind of world would rise from the ashes of this valley, the one built on fear, or the one built on forgiveness that had yet to find its place. The storm rolled closer. Its rumble deep and heavy, as both men stood locked in silence. Caught between the war that was ending and the reckoning that had just begun, rain came just before dawn. Soft and quiet, washing the smoke and gunpowder from the air, the fire near the grove had burned itself to ashes, leaving only blackened earth and the smell of wet wood. The river ran faster now, swollen with the night's storm, carrying bits of charred bark downstream. The valley was silent, save for the low rustle of wind through the grass and the faint whimper of a wounded horse somewhere near the ridge. The woman sat beside the warrior, eyes red and tired. The small boy she had rushed to save lay wrapped in a blanket, his tiny chest rising faintly. The bullet had grazed him, not pierced him. The healer's medicine, made from crushed willow and warm water, had slowed the bleeding. It was a miracle in a night that had known none. She brushed the boy's hair from his forehead and whispered a prayer she barely remembered from. Childhood, something about mercy, something about home. The warrior watched the sun break through the clouds. The light came slow, stretching across the land that had seen too much pain. His people were gathering again, moving quietly between the tents. No one shouted. No one celebrated. The battle that almost was had left a mark deeper than blood. It had shown them how fragile peace truly was, and how quickly men could lose it. The captain stood a short distance away, his uniform soaked, hat gone, face pale from exhaustion. His men looked to him for orders, but none came. He was staring at the camp, at the women tending the hurt, at the children huddled near the fire. He had seen war before, but never like this, never, where the line between guilt and duty felt so thin it could cut through the heart. He approached slowly, his rifle slung low, hands empty. The warrior rose to meet him, his expression calm but guarded. The woman stayed close, watching, ready for the wrong word to undo what little peace was left. The captain stopped a few paces away. "I came here to pass through," he said quietly, "not to destroy." The warrior's gaze was steady. "Then go now. Leave the land as you found it." The captain nodded. "But I can't change the map. The map is paper," the warrior said. "The land is not." For a moment the two men simply stood. There the soldier bound by orders, the Apache bound by the earth beneath his feet. It wasn't forgiveness that passed between them, but understanding born out of weariness and truth. The captain looked back toward his men. "We'll move south," he said. "There's another pass through the valley edge. I'll make sure the others stay clear of your camp." The warrior inclined his head. "Then you leave in peace." Captain lingered, eyes drifting to the woman beside him. "You don't belong here," he said softly, not unkindly. She met his gaze. "I didn't belong anywhere until now." He seemed to understand. With a tired breath, he turned and walked away, calling his men to pack up. The clatter of gear and hooves faded into the distance until there was nothing left but the steady rhythm of the rain. When it was done, the camp gathered around the elder. He spoke in low tones, his voice rough but steady. He thanked the spirits for sparing them, for letting the storm end before it claimed more lives. Then he looked at the woman, the outsider, who had brought her own storm and somehow survived it. "You came with fear," he said. "You stayed with heart. The land sees that." She bowed her head, unsure how to answer. Around her, faces that once watched with suspicion now showed something different: respect, maybe even quiet gratitude. The healer touched her shoulder. "The boy will live," she said. "He will remember this night, and he will know who stood by him." As days passed, the valley began to heal. The dead were buried near the cedar grove, their graves marked with stones. The trader's wagon lay broken and half sunk in the mud, its wheels swallowed by earth. No one spoke his name again. The river returned to its calm whisper. Carrying away the last traces of the battle that almost was, the woman helped rebuild what had been lost, repairing torn tents, gathering new firewood, tending to the wounded. Each sunrise brought a little more warmth, a little more color to the faces around her. The warrior spent long hours near the ridge, keeping watch, though the soldiers never returned. Sometimes she joined him, standing beside him in silence, watching the horizon glow red beneath the morning sky. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he handed her a bundle wrapped in soft leather. Inside was a small necklace made of bone and turquoise, simple yet beautiful. "You wear this," he said. "It means you are of the camp now." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. He shook his head. "You earned it when you stayed." She looked at him then, really looked the lines of his face. The quiet strength in his eyes, the way the setting sun caught the edge of his hair. There was no promise in his gaze, no easy words, only a deep truth she could feel down to her bones. She reached out and took his hand. "Then I'll stay as long as I'm welcome." He nodded, and that was enough. Weeks turned to months. The world beyond the mountains grew restless again, rumors of more soldiers, more settlers moving west, but the valley stayed quiet. The Apache camp rebuilt deeper into the trees, hidden from the open plains. The woman became part of that rhythm, her hands learning the ways of the land, her heart finding peace in its wildness. She laughed more now, spoke their language slowly but with warmth. The children followed her when she gathered herbs by the river, calling her the woman who brings the rain. The boy she had saved grew stronger. He often sat beside her at the fire, asking questions about where she came from, about the towns beyond the desert. She told him stories not of pain but of learning, of the strength it took to begin again. He listened with wide eyes, the reflection of the flames dancing in them. One morning, the warrior returned from a long ride north. His horse was tired, his clothes dusty, but his face held calm. He said the soldiers had moved on, that the land beyond the hills was empty once more. The elder smiled faintly and said the spirits had kept their word. That night, the camp gathered for the first true feast since the storm. There was laughter, song, and the sound of drums carrying through the night air. The woman watched from beside the fire, her heart full and quiet. When the warrior came to sit beside her, she turned to him and said softly, "When I first came here, I gave myself for shelter. I thought I had lost everything worth keeping. But you showed me what a true home is." He looked at her, his expression steady, but his eyes warm. "Home is not what you find," he said. "It is what you choose to protect." She smiled, her fingers brushing against his. The night stretched around them, calm and alive. The stars shimmered above, reflected in the slow-moving river. The air smelled of cedar and smoke, and somewhere, a child's laughter echoed through the dark. The valley slept in peace again. Seasons passed. The world outside changed. But within those mountains, time seemed to slow. The woman stayed, her hair touched with sun, her heart bound to the land she had once feared. The warrior grew older too, his strength tempered by quiet wisdom. Together, they watched the children grow into the next generation, strong and unafraid. Sometimes travelers passed through the valley, lost riders, weary wanderers. They spoke of a woman who lived among the Apache, who had once come with nothing and built a life from ashes. They said she carried the strength of the plains in her voice and the calm of the river in her eyes. No one knew her name anymore. Only the story remained, the woman who gave herself for shelter and found a true home in the heart of the wild. And when the wind swept through the grass and the river sang beneath the sky, it carried whispers of that story, still a reminder that love, when born from loss, can shape even the roughest land into something sacred. The valley held its peace, the fires burned softly, and the night that had almost torn them apart became the night that bound them forever.